If you missed Rachel's interview with former FBI Director James Comey, we've published several video clips from the show, but just as importantly, we've also published the full transcript. Rachel Maddow, MSNBC. So, it is fortuitous timing that the man who wrote these memos is our guest tonight. I'm very much looking forward to asking him about that and everything else under the sun. Share, tweet, email, save, embed. James Comey has been a lifelong public servant and law enforcement professional. He served as a federal prosecutor in the Eastern District of Virginia and Southern District of New York, where he rose to become U.S. Attorney in the Southern District. He then became Deputy Attorney General of the United States and then Director of the FBI. At this point, he expected to be about halfway through the normal 10-year term for an FBI director, but President Trump fired him in May. Mr. Comey has now written a book about his time in public life and his views of ethical leadership. It is driving everybody absolutely crazy, up to and including the president. It's called A Higher Loyalty, Truth, Lies and Leadership. Director Comey, it's really nice to meet you. Thanks for being here. James Comey, former FBI director, it's great to meet you. Great to be here. Maddow, thank you for timing this whole thing, so the memos came out just before you sat down. Comey, I had no idea. Maddow, yes. And I haven't actually had a chance to read what they have released. I can tell you how they start. What follows are notes I typed in the vehicle immediately upon exiting Trump Tower on the 6th of January 17, although I wrote this in less than 5 minutes after the meeting, and I have tried to use actual words spoken, including quoting directly in some places. I have not used quotation marks throughout because my purpose was to capture the substance of what was said. I'm not sure of the proper classification here, so have chosen secret. Please let me know if it should be higher or lower than that. Do you recognize those as your words? Comey, I do. Maddow, why did you explain to Congress that you didn't write memos like this after other interactions with other presidents? What trained you or told you or made you believe that you should write a memo like this after interactions with President Trump? Comey, well, the first meeting in particular, I was concerned that I needed a record to show the other intelligence agency chiefs who had been with me but didn't stay behind for the second private meeting, and I also was worried that I was meeting alone with the president who talk about things that were relating to him and to the FBI's core responsibilities. And given the nature of the person, as I understood the president-elect, he might not tell the truth about those if it ever became an issue, and so, I needed a written record. Maddow, and is this the sort of thing that FBI officials and even FBI special agents and people throughout the Bureau do as a matter of course? Is there a template for this kind of thing? Do you train one another? This is a way to approach your role as a potential witness and important interaction? Comey, these are different than what agents would normally do. Agents would normally prepare what's called a 302 in making an official record. This was an email to my team who had been there, just telling them what went on. The other memos I wrote were more sort of aids to my own memory. But none of them were done in sort of the way an FBI agent would do. I'm not an FBI agent. I wasn't. I was the director. Maddow, you have shared a lot of your details in congressional testimony, in particular now in the book, which I buried under my notes here, about your meetings and interactions with President Trump. And so, we know some of what is in these memos. Is Congress, is the public going to learn substantially new information and important new information about your interactions with the president, or do you feel like you conveyed the most important stuff to Congress? Comey, I don't know, because I haven't had access to my memos in quite a while, so I don't know whether there's significant stuff that's in there that I wasn't able to tell in the book. I don't think so. Maddow, okay. Comey, but I haven't read them myself. So I'm okay with transparency. I just assumed the Department of Justice went through the steps to make sure it wasn't jeopardizing an ongoing investigation. Maddow, well, I mean, to that point, you say in the book that you don't know if the president's requests to you about the Russia investigation and your firing constituted obstruction of justice. You said a prosecutor would need to review all the evidence of the president's intent behind those actions in order to do that. Do you think these memos are part of the evidence that a prosecutor, Robert Mueller or somebody else, should be considering when determining the president's intent? Comey, yes. In this way, I'm sure the special counsel's considering my recollection of those events, which are reflected in these memos, but it's my recollection that is the evidence that would be used if there was ever a proceeding. These would be to show that I wrote it down at the time, sort of bolster the credibility of my recollection. Maddow, can it as a general matter impede an ongoing investigation to have central evidence, important evidence, made available to the public, and that, of course, includes being shown to the person who may be the subject of investigation? Comey, could in general, it could. Maddow, yes. Comey, it would depend upon the circumstances of the case and the material. Maddow, and in this case, do you worry that that's a possibility? Comey, I don't know because I haven't gone through them in detail. I think all the significant parts are also in my book, which the FBI reviewed and approved as part of the pre-publication review. So, I really can't say here. Maddow, in terms of what Congress has had access to, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein has come under a lot of really intense political pressure to hand over internal documents from the investigation. It has led to some unprecedented stuff being made either public or given to Congress, information about a FISA warrant to surveil a Trump foreign policy advisor, the EC, the electronic communication from July 2016. Which is a term I didn't know before this week, but that's apparently the document that officially launched the Russia investigation and also now these memos, even though they're part of an ongoing investigation. What do you think of the kind of demands that Republican members of Congress have been making to see these documents that are internal to this investigation? Does it worry you that this kind of stuff is being exposed for the first time? Comey, I don't know enough about what the considerations are inside the department to know whether I should be worried. I assume there's a robust back and forth and they're protecting the prerogatives of the special counsel and the FBI, but I don't know enough to say. Share, tweet, email, save, embed Maddow, in terms of the Carter Page FISA warrant, because I mentioned it, it used to be that even the existence of a FISA warrant or sometimes even the existence of the FISA court was something that public officials didn't even want to acknowledge. But now we know that you and many other officials are among those who at one point or another signed off on applications for a surveillance warrant against this guy who at one point was part of the Trump campaign. Nearly a dozen members of Congress this week said that every official who signed off on those warrant applications, including you, should be prosecuted for doing so, that FISA warrant is a scandal and that Carter Page was wronged. What do you make of that whole line of criticism? Comey, I don't think it's based in substance or law or a genuine concern for the integrity of the FISA process, which is incredibly rigorous and overseen by independent federal judges. So, I think it's a political deal. Maddow, Carter Page was a foreign policy advisor to the president's campaign. From what we know in terms of him being mentioned in other court cases, including a Russian spy ring that was wrapped up in here in New York, which he was in contact with, it seems, just from a layman's perspective, that there was reasonable cause to at least look at him in terms of his contacts with the Russian government. He's then announced as a foreign policy advisor to the Trump campaign. Paul Manafort is announced as chairman for the Trump campaign. It has been credibly reported that Paul Manafort was under FBI investigation as far back as 2014 because of his dealings in the former Soviet Union and potentially with the Russian government. When the FBI knows that kind of stuff about people who end up getting vaulted from relative obscurity into important positions in an active presidential campaign for the nominee of a major party, is there some duty to warn? Is there some action that the FBI should take? You're not asked to do background checks on people for political campaigns, but when you know what you know about these folks, you know about ongoing investigations involving these people in serious matters. Should something have been said? Comey, I don't want to talk about those in particular, but in general, it depends upon what the facts are that started the investigation and what you've learned. The goal is always to disrupt and defeat the adversary's actions. So, sometimes, that means building a criminal case and locking up the person who has been working with the foreign power. Sometimes it means going to the person and saying, hey, we know you're hooked up with them, knock that off. Sometimes, it is a laying in the weeds trying to develop sources of information to get close to them. Lots of different techniques. Always the goal is to defeat the adversary's actions in an effort to influence the United States. Maddow, did anything like that happen in terms of Paul Manafort? Comey, I can't answer that. I mean, I could but I can't. And that kind of stuff is not in the book because the book can't contain classified information or investigative information. Maddow, right. These memos that have just been made public tonight, they literally became public as you sat down. I want to ask you about a couple of things that in my control room, they've just identified as information that they think is new to the public. As I read this to you, I will be reading it to myself for the first time. I've not seen this. From one of your memos dated February 8, 2017, quote, as I waited in the West Wing lobby, Mike Flynn stopped by and sat down. We chatted for about 5 minutes about his new job, the challenges in building a staff and working with folks who had never been in government before, how he maintains fitness, etc. There was no mention by either of us of redacted. Mike Flynn at that point had already been interviewed. February 2017, had already been interviewed by FBI agents. He was interviewed by FBI agents at the White House 2 days after he was sworn in January 2017. Clearly, the FBI had reason to be questioning him while he's serving as National Security Advisor. Share tweet email save embed. Was that awkward? I'm not going to ask you what's redacted here. Presumably, it's redacted for good reason. But your interactions with Mike Flynn at that point, when he's at least been just questioned by the FBI, there's been a warning about him from the Justice Department to the White House. Clearly he's still in his National Security Advisor role. Comey: yes, it was awkward. One of the reasons I recorded it was given those circumstances, I wanted to make sure I was able to remember that we didn't talk about the subject of the interview. I didn't say a word about it. He didn't say a word about it. It was just sort of chit-chat as I waited for another meeting that wasn't involving him. Maddow: why was Flynn interviewed by FBI agents after he was sworn in? Comey: I don't know whether I can answer that, Rachel. Again, I don't know. I want to be careful that I don't say anything that steps on Robert Mueller's investigators' work. And so, I don't think I can answer that as I sit here. Maddow: let me ask you a related question that I also don't know if you can answer. This has bothered me just as a citizen. This has sort of made me itch from the very beginning. Given what the FBI and other intelligence agencies knew about Flynn at the time, it has always bothered me to think that he was sitting in on the president's daily brief, that he was involved in the highest-level national security discussions at the White House as the president's duly sworn National Security Advisor. I mean, and this is after the Justice Department had taken this remarkable step where the acting Attorney General Sally Yates went to the White House and warned them that he was compromised by the Russian government, that he was not being honest, that he appeared to be vulnerable to blackmail. Did the FBI, did any intelligence agency that was involved in coming to this conclusion about Flynn take any measures to keep sensitive information from him, to protect national security from somebody who is believed to be compromised? He stayed in the White House for a long time after that warning was given. Comey: yes, you predicted correctly. I understand why you have that question. Maddow: yes. Comey: I'm not permitted to answer that. Maddow: in terms of what happened once Flynn was sworn in, once that warning happened, once he stayed on in the office, ultimately he does get fired. The president, you've testified to Congress and you write about in the book, told you to lay off the investigation to Flynn. It's been publicly reported that President Trump did more than just ask you himself. It's been publicly reported that he also asked the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coats, to intervene with you, to end the investigation into Flynn. And you said in June that you never talked to DNI Coats on that subject. Did anybody at any time other than the president ever ask you to back off the Flynn investigation? Comey: no. Maddow: has there ever been any interaction between either yourself or the FBI in general and CIA, NSA, Treasury, any of the other agencies that might have been involved in this investigation that seemed not fulsome, that seemed not in keeping with the way previous counterintelligence investigations might have gone? Was there any reason to worry about anything going on in any other agency? Comey: not that I'm aware of. I have seen the public reporting that you mentioned, but I have no personal knowledge of that. Maddow: okay, I want to ask you about George Papadopoulos. Comey: okay. Maddow: on page 189 of your book, you say, in late July, the FBI learned that a Trump campaign foreign policy advisor named George Papadopoulos had been discussing months earlier obtaining from the Russian government emails damaging to Hillary Clinton. Share tweet email save embed. Now, that was news to me in the book. And I know the FBI had to sign off on everything that's in the book. But the statement of offense around George Papadopoulos just say that he was told that the Russian himself emails of Hillary Clinton's. You appear to be going further here, saying that it was more than that, that he actually was in conversations with them about obtaining those emails, presumably for the Trump campaign. Is that how you meant that? Comey: yes, I took that. That comes from, the public source for that is the two versions of the memo. I don't know what they called it, from the HPSCI over the page FISA. Maddow: okay. Comey: so that's an accurate description of what is in the public record. Maddow: so, Papadopoulos, that information came to the FBI and the FBI brought together a multi-agency working group to start this investigation, or did the FBI start this on its own? Comey: the FBI opened it in our counterintelligence division in late July of 2016. Maddow: okay. That timing ends up being important for the late politicization of that question, because there had been a lot of allegations that maybe the FBI started that investigation because of Christopher Steele's dossier, those intelligence memos he prepared. That's not true. Comey, not true. Maddow, did the FBI have a relationship with Christopher Steele that you would consider to be one of trust, a useful relationship, fruitful relationship with him? Comey, all I'm permitted to say about that as I understand it is he was considered a reliable person by the FBI. Maddow, okay, and in terms of how that broke down, I want to talk to you a little bit about some stuff that happened closer to the election. But it seems like there was a mutual breakdown in the relationship between Mr. Steele and the FBI getting close to the time of the election. He's characterized it that way. Would you see it that way as well? Comey, yes, I don't know anything about that. And if I did, I wouldn't say. But I don't know anything about it. Maddow, alright, I'm going to ask you more questions that you can answer when we come back. Comey, okay, good. Maddow, in part because I'm going to read this memo that just came out. James Comey is our guest tonight. Stay with us. Commercial break. Maddow, joining us once again is former FBI Director James Comey. His new book, A Higher Loyalty, is driving everybody crazy. It's very good actually. It's very readable book. Usually, public official books kind of feel like paint by numbers, but you can kind of tell that you wrote this and you're into it. Comey, it's a high bar, isn't it? Maddow, I know, I'm sorry. The same thing you should hear when cable news hosts write books. It's not even paint by numbers, it's just splatter. Since you sat down, we have been absorbing the memos that you wrote after interactions with President Trump before he fired you, which have just this hour been made public. I want to ask you about something that is new to me in these memos, which concerns a conversation you apparently had with then White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus. Quote, Mr. Priebus then asked me if this was a private conversation. I replied that it was. He then said he wanted to ask me a question and I could decide whether it was appropriate to answer. He then asked, do you have a FISA order on Mike Flynn? Share, tweet, email, save, embed. I paused for a few seconds and then said that I would answer here, but that this illustrated the kind of question that had to be asked and answered through established channels. I said the answer redacted. I then explained that the normal channel was from DOJ leadership to the White House counsel about such things, redacted. I would normally make sure the AG and Deputy AG were aware and they would likely inform the White House counsel and he could decide whether to inform that Chief of Staff. I explained that it was important that communications about any particular case go through that channel to protect us and to protect the White House from any accusations of improper influence. What's the context there? What's going on there in this moment? Comey, I was in a meeting with him in the White House. This is the President's then Chief of Staff, Reince Priebus. It was a follow-up to the dinner I'd had with the President on the 27th. As I understood the meeting, it was for me to introduce myself, get to know him and to explain how we interact, how the FBI interacts with the White House. He seemed to want to get it right. That was what I understood the purpose to be. Maddow, and so, when he was asking you this, when you're having this interaction with Reince Priebus, at that time, the White House had been warned that Mike Flynn was perceived to potentially be compromised by a foreign power, that FBI interview had happened, the warning from the acting Attorney General had happened, and at that time, Mike Flynn was still in the White House. This actually goes to the questions I was asking you a little bit before about the potential threat that it poses to national security to have somebody compromised by a foreign power in a national security job in the White House. It sort of sounds like Reince Priebus was asking for a little help on that. Do you have a FISA order on Mike Flynn? I mean, was he asking if Mike Flynn is currently under surveillance or if Mike Flynn is under a very serious form of investigation? Do you know what he was getting at by asking you that? Comey, not for sure. I think he was asking, is there current electronic surveillance under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act of the National Security Advisor? Maddow, yes, and you did give him an answer. Comey, correct. And then told him that the way that should work is you should go to ask the Justice Department. They'll figure out whether they can answer the question and they'll get back. White House counsel should. Maddow, was it improper for you to tell him directly in that moment? Comey, I didn't think so. I hesitated because I thought, I'm trying to illustrate how it should work and I made a judgment in the moment that the answer, that I was confident that if the President's Chief of Staff, White House counsel, asked the Justice Department, they would get the answer. And so, I could give the answer in the moment and use it to illustrate the way it should work going forward. Maddow, so, you're sort of teaching the White House Chief of Staff how these things are supposed to happen when they're handled, when the relationship between the Justice Department and the White House is properly handled? Comey, yes, trying to. Maddow, did he learn? Comey, I don't know. Some indication that he didn't, because at the end of this, after I have explained the importance of regularized communication, he took me to see the president on the way out. Even though I said, I'm fine, I'm sure he's really busy, I don't need to see him, but, so that was at least was some indication that he wasn't getting it. Maddow, I have a bunch of questions to ask you about this. One particular question about Rod Rosenstein, who's Deputy Attorney General, who remains in his role, although he's been attacked a lot by the president and there's a lot of political pressure on him because of his role overseeing the Russia investigation. Obviously, you explain in the book your concerns about the way he handled your firing. He produced that memo that, essentially, the way you see it and the way a lot of people see it, sort of cooked up a pretense for firing you. Did he know at the time that he did that about the president asking you to lay off Mike Flynn and to lift the cloud of the Russia investigation? Was Rosenstein one of the people who was in the know in terms of the kinds of interactions you'd had with the president that you felt were alarming? Comey, I don't know. I didn't inform him of those, but I don't know what there was an acting person in that role before he got there, Dana Boente. I don't know what briefing Dana gave him on what we've been telling Dana. Maddow, I have a question about Dana Boente. I don't know if you know this, but we obtained some handwritten notes that we believe Mr. Boente took after talking with you on March 30, 2017. They're in what we confirmed are his handwriting. And he has since, I should say, the Washington Post has since obtained confirmation that these notes are what they appear to be, which is his handwritten note. So, it's all caveats. That's why we think they're real. Share, tweet, email, save, embed, but this is something that we haven't reported and I wanted to ask you about it because it's essentially hearsay. Mr. Boente in these notes is writing down what appears to be what you're telling him about your conversation with the president. And one of the things that was most striking to us, which we've already reported, is these phrases, lift the cloud, talking about needing relief from the Russia investigation, very, very directly tracked with what you testified to Congress about what the president told you. Boente also took a note that looks like it says going to bring lawsuit with something we candidate red, steel. This looks from Boente's notes. I don't know if you know his handwriting, but that's what he says. Comey, I don't. Maddow, it looked like he was taking a note when he was talking to you about your interactions with the president, in which it looks like the president told you he was going to bring some sort of lawsuit over the Steele dossier. Comey, yes. Maddow, did the president say that to you? Comey, looking at this, I have some recollection of that. I don't know whether it's in my memo. I wrote a memo after that March 30th call from the president, but it actually rings a bell as I sit here. Maddow, and the content of the dossier, particularly the prostitute allegation involving the Ritz-Carlton hotel room and all of that, you write in detail about bringing that up with the president, how unnerving that was for you both shortly after the election in January 2017. Was it your impression that the president was concerned about the real damage that the dossier could do to him as a legal matter, as sparking an investigation, or did he seem more concerned in terms of embarrassment or sort of the way he might have to personally answer for it to his wife or to his family? Comey, I don't know. It may have been both, but my sense is he was focused most on the personal piece because he would bring it up with me repeatedly. And at least once or twice in bringing that up, he mentioned his wife and how bad it would be if she thought, at one point, he said, if there was even a 1% chance it was true. So, it could be both, but I remember mostly I believe that the focus on the personal. Maddow, in terms of the president's personal concerns there, you say at one point in these memos that when you were talking with him about those kind of allegations in the dossier, the president on his own terms brought up women who, quote, falsely accused him of grabbing them or touching them, says there was a, quote, stripper, and Trump gave me the sense that he was defending himself to me. What does that mean when you were talking to the president about the dossier? He on his own accord brought up other allegations that have been made against him by other women during the course of the campaign. Comey, yes. Maddow, and was he asking you to investigate those matters? Was he? Why would he bring that up with the director of the FBI? Comey, I had no idea. It seemed off-axis from what I was there to talk to him about. And so, it was kind of spontaneous from him. I didn't ask any question that elicited that statement, and I didn't know. A bunch of the senior officials who you briefed at the time, who you gave these memos to about your interactions with the president. A bunch of these folks have ended up having their lives follow curvy paths in the past year. Obviously, you've had the biggest curveball of them all. But Jim Rybitsky, is how you say it I think? Comey, yes. Maddow, he's resigned from the FBI. Share tweet email save embed James Baker I believe is still there, although he's been reassigned, and our reporting indicates that he's been reassigned to what's basically sort of a potted plant job at the FBI, in comparison with the kind of high-level job he had in the past. Your deputy, Andrew McCabe, very publicly fired, publicly attacked by the president. You, of course, have not just lost your job but have spent a year as a piñata for the president and for congressional Republicans. Andrew McCabe said when he was fired, "Here's the reality, I'm being singled out and treated this way because of the role I played, the actions I took, the events I witnessed in the aftermath of the firing of James Comey." The release of this Inspector General report against McCabe was accelerated only after my testimony to the House Intelligence Committee revealed that I would corroborate former Director Comey's accounts of his discussions with the president. Do you think that's the case? Are you concerned there's been an orchestrated campaign to target you and other people who could corroborate your testimony as witnesses? Comey, there's certainly been an organized campaign to target me. There was definitely an organized campaign to attack Andy McCabe, and urge his firing, tear down his reputation, attack his wife, just shameful attacks from the president directly. And with respect to the others, I know them all well, there's different stories. Rybitsky was going to leave anyway. Baker was reassigned, very talented general counsel and is in a job, I don't think you call it a potted plant job, but he is way away from the leadership floor of the FBI. Maddow, Andrew McCabe was raked across the coals in this Inspector General report. We are now told today that it has resulted in a criminal referral to a U.S. Attorney's office. McCabe's lawyer says he doesn't think that Andrew McCabe will end up being charged here. But this all stems from an incident in which Mr. McCabe was involved in talking to the press about the Clinton investigation, how it was being handled by DOJ and FBI. He says everything he did was within his job description, it was to preserve the public standing of the FBI. He says it was all authorized. Clearly, the Inspector General doesn't agree with him on that. While you were director of the FBI and he was your deputy, was there clarity under your leadership about talking to the press, about the issue of leaks, about who could authorize people to discuss things with reporters? Comey, I think so. There were two people who could authorize disclosures, the director and deputy director. So, Andy had the authority to speak to the media and to authorize communications with the media. Maddow, do you think he improperly spoke to the media in that capacity then? Share tweet email save embed Comey, I don't know for sure. I know that he didn't tell me about it, didn't ask me about it before he did it. I think the Inspector General's report is right in that respect. And I would have expected that. But I think he had the authority to do that, and I think if he were here, he might say, well, I didn't need to talk to the boss because I had the authority to do that. Maddow, yes. Comey, and that's a hard one, because given all that was going on at that point in time, I would have expected him to talk to me. But I think as a matter of rule, he had the authority. Maddow, we have another matter to ask you about that relates to the press learning something the press probably should not have learned. We'll do that, right after we come back from this break. Comey, okay. Maddow, thank you, sir. Commercial break. Maddow, we're back now with James Comey, former director of the FBI, author of the new best-selling book, A Higher Loyalty. Thank you again, Mr. Director. Comey, thanks for having me. Maddow, we are still absorbing these memos of yours which were just released as we sat down to talk. We were discussing the fact that in Dana Boente's notes, which we obtained about his conversation with you, he references the president telling you he wanted to bring a lawsuit against Christopher Steele. You did note that in your memo, which we found here. Yes, Comey, that's why I created them. Maddow, the president reportedly telling you, I have a beautiful wife, it has been very painful, can you imagine me, hookers? The president then telling you, according to your own memo, he's bringing a personal lawsuit against Christopher Steele. As far as we know, the president never did that, but he advised you he might at that point.